You know what I said about college YouTubers having their thing?
I feel like every college YouTuber has their thing. Mine's a cat.
Rings are the thing now? Welcome back. In this video, we're going to be talking all about the college interview. Now, it's something that a lot of people don't really know how to approach. They don't know what questions are going to be asked. They don't know how they should be best prepared to ace the college interview, or what is the college interview even for when you're applying to the US. So, in this entire video, I'm going to be breaking down just that in 5 key components. Number 1, I'm going to be talking about the most common questions applicants like myself had when they were going into their college interview. Number 2, I'm going to be talking about how you should really prepare for a college interview and what are the 5 key steps you can take to make sure that you're walking into that interview completely ready to ace it. Number 3, we're going to break down what you should actually do when you're inside the interview to make sure that you have a really good grip on how it went for you and the other person has a good opinion and likes you, because at the end of the day, that's the goal of a college interview. We're going to be discussing a few interpersonal skills and tips that I've really collected from a few books I've read about psychology, interpersonal communication, as well as persuasion. Number 4, we're going to be discussing what you should do post the interview. Lastly, before we jump into the video, a lot of you aren't subscribed, and if you find this information helpful, if you're new to this channel, please consider hitting the button. Not really sure which side it's on, but consider hitting the button, subscribe, join the family. We're growing every single day, and I can't wait to keep sharing information with all of you regarding the whole college application process and just make it a lot less stressful than people perceive it to be. So with that out of the way, let's head into the video. So, in the first part of this video, we're going to quickly blitz through the most common questions I had when I was applying to college and giving a college interview, and questions I know you're probably asking as well. So, number 1, what is the point of a college interview? Well, it's a mixture of a few things. Number 1, you have to remember that they just need to like you. That is the only goal you're supposed to be going through with the entire interview. As long as they like you at the end of the 20-25 minute session, you're good to go. But what are they looking for out of this? They want to make sure that you are a 3-dimensional person. You're not just an application anymore, you're not just a person anymore. You are someone that they can infer things about. You are someone they can tell, oh, this is how his personality is. This is how Shaurya talks. This is how Shaurya thinks. They want to really know how you are in a face-to-face interaction. Now it's going to be a virtual interaction, but it's the same thing. Number 2, they also want to check your demonstrated interest. They want to know how much you've really researched about the college and, well, are you really someone who they would be willing to give a seat to for admissions? And number 3, it is also just a way for a college to utilize its alumni network, put them to good use, and also spread a lot of good words about the college to make sure that college applicants like yourself who are coming in for these interviews really want to go to that college after the interview. Second question, should I take the college interview? Yes. Any opportunity you get to express yourself, you should take. Even if you aren't the most socially comfortable, the opportunity to give your admissions officer more than just your name, your biography, your statistics, your essays is insanely helpful for your application because it adds color to your personality. It gives them an opportunity to see you from a different lens. So yes, always try and take the college interview, even if it is optional. Question number 3, can a college interview make or break my admissions? No, it cannot. A college interview is a very small portion of the entire application process, and I was extremely worried if my interviews went bad, then whoop, there goes my acceptance letter, I'm going to get rejected straight out. But you have to understand that a lot of the people who are interviewing you are alumni of these colleges, and if you were a college admissions officer, how much would you trust these individuals to tell you whether someone is fit for application or not fit for application? A lot of the times interviewers will tell applicants that you are literally one of the most qualified people I've ever met, and they still get rejected. So no, it can't make or break your application. You just need to be a little above average in order to get noticed. Number 4, what are a few common questions my interviewer will ask me? Tell us a little about yourself. Why do you want to go to this school? What is it about you that makes for a great fit for the university you're applying to? Why have you decided to study this particular major? Tell us one person who inspires you. And if you're an international applicant, which a lot of you tend to be, this is a question I didn't prepare for, but I ended up getting. Why do you want to study in the United States? If you're in India, Philippines, Indonesia, any other country other than the US, why are you leaving your education system to go to the United States? It's a very common question, but make sure you give it some thought because they are going to ask it to you. Number 5, how aware should I be of politics, current affairs, and just things that are happening around the globe? you should have a general understanding of what's happening, but more often than not, college representatives in these interviews are specifically told to stay away from all topics related to politics, religion, and anything that could get into a heated debate or become extremely opinionated. My Stanford interviewer was actually a volunteer with the Aam Aadmi Party in India, which, if you don't know, is a political party, and we had zero discussion about the entire world of politics. If anybody is going to ask me about politics, it would have been him, but he really didn't test me on that because it's not something you should be talking about. But if it comes to something that's specific to your major, like let's say you're applying for a business degree, you're applying to Wharton at the University of Pennsylvania, do expect a few questions to be thrown at you about the world of business. I was applying for psychology, economics, but I was extremely interested in entrepreneurship as well. And I was asked about how WeWork was doing or how Oyo was doing, really popular companies in the world and in India as well. So do expect to have some questions about the major you're applying for to be thrown at you so that they can also understand what really is your interest and level of knowledge in this particular field. Number 6, how prepared should I be? Being over-prepared is as bad as being underprepared. Make sure that you just have talking points that you've remembered and treat them as launchpads to go into conversation. At the same time, the good thing about a United States college interview is that it's not going to be as in-depth or as major specific as applications to Oxford or Cambridge. They're not going to grill you about your subject matter expertise. They just really want to know who you are as a person and will probably throw in a few light questions about your subject as well. And the last question, question 7, what should I wear to the interview? Since you're in a virtual environment, still remain in semi-formals. If you're a guy, have something with a collar on. You don't need to wear a suit and tie. If you're a girl, I'm not entirely sure. I'll put a few links down below which should have some clothing recommendations. But since you're going to be on Skype or Zoom, please do not wear, pajamas into your college interview, because just in case they say like, can you show us around the room, or they do anything just to test if you're as serious about this college as they would like you to be, you don't want to be in a situation where you're just like, do you see what I mean? The second portion of this entire video. What should you do in the road to the interview? What are some of the things that you should do to prepare for this interview? I have 5 key tips that I usually recommend to people, and these are things I did myself. Number 1 is the college interview matrix. When I was preparing for my college interview, I made sure there were 4 key aspects I was trying to research about. Number 1, I wanted to know about myself. I wanted to know my values, my personality traits, how I am as a person. Number 2, I needed to know about my work. What were the extracurricular activities I'd done, awards I'd achieved, what was the intended major of study I was going for, why did I want to study it? Everything related to academics or extracurricular activities or the things you do outside of the house, inside the classroom, outside the classroom. Those are the things you should know about in this section. Number 3, I needed to know about the college, research the departments they have to offer, research the faculty, research a few of the clubs and organizations that they have, research everything that you feel could come up in an interview or that you would like to talk about in the interview to show why you want to go to that particular place. And the last portion is research your interviewer. And that brings me to the second point. Know who is interviewing you. And the reason I say that is because literally every factor about my college interview was different just because of the person who was interviewing me, which is strange because you'd feel like they'd all follow some sort of template or there'd be a similar flow to it. But I personally feel that either because of the university or because of just who they were as individuals, each of my interviews was extremely different. I basically had 3 interviews. I went for Stanford University's interview, I had Princeton, and I had Duke University's interview. My Stanford University interview was almost like a debate. I was constantly having constructive discussions with this individual where they really tested me about why I did what I did. And they kept giving me counter arguments for diversity in the workplace or why we should actually hire people with disabilities. So everything I said, they flipped it around and gave it back to me and saw what I would respond like, which sounds a lot like a stress interview, and which is why I thought that it wasn't your traditional college interview, because most college interviews don't go like that. Because my Duke University interview, as another example, was extremely laid back, was extremely conversational, and it was just me talking about a lot of my interests, what are the things I've done with my extracurricular activities. It was a completely different environment. And my Princeton University, on the completely other hand, was very formal, very rigid. I just handed him my 1-page resume and he read things off, asked me a little bit about them, asked me why I wanted to go to Princeton. Done. End of story. So the person who's interviewing you, either based on their age, the time of their career, the education, as in when they went to the college that they're interviewing you on behalf of, will influence how your interview will go. And that's why it's extremely important for you to know that. Number 3, Become a storyteller. Going into the interview, you should have a huge collection of stories that represent different qualities about you that you can literally plug and play whenever you're in the interview and whenever you're asked a particular question. For example, if they ask you who is a role model you have outside of your family, you should immediately have a story about, let's say, a mentor you have, or a professor you've worked with, or a teacher who's taught you a particular subject. Those are stories that you should have ready to act as a launch pad. You don't want to be caught off guard and then be stumbling and thinking on the spot. At the same time, you don't want to be over prepared with your stories and literally rote learn them and act like you've literally memorized every single line, because those things are just going to come off the wrong way. And the whole point of a story is that it should flow. It should come off naturally. It should be authentic and genuine to who you are. And that's what I mean by having a story bag almost. You're keeping this collection of experiences you've had that you can launch whenever you're asked a particular question. Number 4, know your ROI, which is a return on an interview. You need to understand what the other person is trying to get out of this entire interview. You need to know that when they're leaving, what exactly are they going to do with this conversation that you've had with them. Now, whenever you have an interview with someone, this representative's goal is to write a one-page report about you, how you are, maybe evaluate and quantify you on a few metrics, but more often than not, it's just a one-page written summary of the conversation you had with this individual. Now, it's important to know that the admissions officer is going to use this one-page report to get a better understanding of you. So if you know that they're going to be taking down notes, give them information and give them material which can be written down. So, what do I mean by that? When I had my Duke interview, it was going extremely well, but somewhere along the line it became a little informal maybe, and we started discussing about things like Netflix shows or stand-up comedy, and it was just a lot of things that we were really trying to discuss. Now, that's great, but if you keep in mind the fact that this individual is going to write a one-page summary about your interview, a lot of that information might not be the most helpful in giving someone else a better understanding of who you are. So, always remember what they're going to get out of this interview. They're going to get out a specific set of experiences, learnings, motivations about who you are as a person, your interest in the college, and then pass that over to an admissions representative. So make sure when you're saying something, it adds to that idea or it adds to that one-pager about who you are. The last point in the road to the interview is a very simple one. It's something that I feel a lot of people should just practice. Make sure that you have a one-page resume ready with highlights about the things that you've done. What should your resume contain? I personally had my education. I had what school I was in, the grades I received. I had a few of my strongest extracurriculars on that page. I even had a few leadership roles that I'd engaged with throughout high school. I had a few awards, and right at the top right corner of my entire resume, I gave like a 2 or 3 line summary about who I was as a person and what were the things I stood for. So that whenever someone's going through my entire resume, they just have to go to this one part and they're like, oh, okay, Shaurya is interested in disability advocacy. He is a social entrepreneur. He's extremely passionate about behavioral psychology and communication and understanding how our words can influence people. So these are just a few of the core messages that someone could take away when they were reading my resume, and hopefully the same should work for you. That brings me to the third part, where we're really going to discuss a few persuasive skills that you can try and adopt to make sure that your interview does go well and that they do like you. So we're going to be talking about 5 key tips that I've picked up, I've experienced along the way, I've researched to try and make sure that your college interview goes really well. Number 1, idea territory. This was a mistake I made in my Stanford interview, but essentially the person asked me 2 questions with a distance of, I'd say, about 5 to 7 minutes. And my response to those questions was basically the same. And it was just because I panicked a little bit on the spot. I went back to what was familiar to me, and the things that end up being familiar to you, you also repeat a lot. The question really was, what is your favorite book or your favorite author? And I mentioned an individual called Dan O'Reilly, who is a behavioral economist at MIT, but now he's at Duke. And the second part of the interview, the interviewer asked me about who is someone I look up to outside of my parents. And I panicked and I immediately just said Dan O'Reilly, and I had to stick with it. And my interviewer cut me off within 30 seconds and said, yeah, I already know about that. And your goal in the interview is to make sure that every question's answer adds a new layer to your personality and gives them a better understanding of who you are. So the concept behind idea territory is that every idea has its territory, just like an animal does, right? And to mark that territory, you really want to make sure that 2 ideas aren't infringing on each other. You don't want to repeat any information. Take a little time when someone asks you something. Don't panic. take 30 seconds, and then give an answer which you feel like the individual does not know about or hasn't heard before. Number 2, the yes snowball. Now, this is again an example from my Stanford University interview where the individual really wanted to test me on what it was I was doing and why it was doing it. To give you a little bit of context, I had a recruitment platform for people with disabilities, and I was really passionate about making sure that workplaces were more inclusive, they were more diverse, and we really tried to create an abled environment for individuals. If I give you a series of yeses, I give you prompts to which you say yes, that means you're much more likely to say yes to my eventual answer. So to give you an example, when I was talking about disability hiring, I said that disability hiring is extremely important in today's day and age because Gen Z as an entire generation is extremely socially inclined, right? And he said yes. Then I said, okay. And whenever an individual from Generation Z wants to associate themselves with a company or a brand, it's becoming extremely popular for them to line up with the company's values and missions, right? He said, yes. I said, okay, so then if you see a company having an inclusive environment, if you walk into a KFC and that company has an individual who's speech and hearing impaired, does it create a unique customer experience? He said, yes. I said, therefore, you're increasing your brand value, you're lining up with Generation Z's affinity for inclusive environments and companies that stand for more than just what they're selling. He said, yes again. And I said, that's why it's important to hire individuals who are differently abled. And that's when I got my final yes. So initially, my Stanford University interviewer was resistant to the idea that hiring an individual who is differently abled can have a positive impact on your company. And mind you, he didn't really believe that. He just said that because he wanted to test me. But by taking him down a series of yeses, I made it a lot easier for him to finally understand where I was coming from in the line of work that I was doing. So the yes snowball basically means that you take an individual down a path of yeses, try to get them to see your point of view by sequentially getting them closer and closer to what you're trying to say, and then get them to finally understand where you're really coming from. So that's point number 2. Number 3, intersectional traits. Intersectionality is really helpful when it comes to what it is about you that's unique. In one of my interviews, I was asked, okay, there's a bus that's going to this college. This bus only has one seat left. Why is it that I should give you a seat on that bus? And to be very honest, I didn't know. I did think about it, but I really wasn't that confident in my ability to give a strong answer. And I think that the best kinds of answers come from the idea of intersectionality. To give you an example, you could be a good debater. You could be a good actor. You could be a sensitive person. You could be a hardworking person. But all of these qualities and experiences in isolation can be matched by someone else. Yes, you might be a really good debater, but when you pair that with your increasing love for a subject like psychology, you become debater, psychology, then maybe you throw in another experience. And the goal is really to make yourself an overlap of all of these different things that makes you unique. And then your job is to see how that unique intersection could play at the university you're going to. Do they have a department that maybe has a collaboration between those things? Do they have a particular faculty member who also shares some of those interests? Those are the ways by which you try to match not only what makes you unique, but also what makes that university unique. The fourth thing that is really helpful when you're sitting inside an interview, and I feel like this is just something I personally believe in a lot, is just smile and laugh. I think it has such a big positive impact on an interview when you're constantly smiling, you're maintaining eye contact, you're laughing. Maybe if there's a lag in the conversation, or maybe, you want to say something and it's not necessarily the best joke, but you get a chuckle out of them. That is really, really important in creating this personal link between, I don't know what this gang sign is, making a personal link between you and the interviewer. As long as you both can continue smiling, laughing with each other, it really leaves both of you feeling that you had a good experience. And sometimes you can even use it to overcompensate when you're a little bit awkward or nervous. Sometimes a little bit of laughter can really go a long way to really lighten the mood and let some of your nerves loose. The last part, which is the most important, is the bonus round of an interview. And it's when you can stretch an interview from just being 15 to 20 minutes to a 30 to 40 minute interview. And that is when they ask you to ask them a particular question. And it's very, very important that you don't ask questions that you can find on the college website, that you can just Google. You want to ask them something either about A, their experience at the particular university, or B, something which you really wanted to find out about the university but you really couldn't find anywhere else. Or maybe it's a notion you have about the university. Like for For example, when I was, talking to my Stanford interviewer, I told him point blank that Stanford, being at the heart of Silicon Valley, is known for having a lot of tech startups and having a lot of tech entrepreneurship. But I was personally really interested in the social impact side and the social entrepreneurship side of the entire sphere of entrepreneurship. So I asked them, is this the place for me? And he went down to tell me all of the different opportunities Stanford has for social entrepreneurs. So those kinds of questions really come into play when you're asking them to someone who's actually been on campus. And then after that, I even had a conversation with him all about their experience at Stanford, some of the fun things they did, some of the things they learned, some notions that they had about the entire place themselves that they broke when they went to Stanford. So those kinds of questions can really elongate your interview and make sure that you really shift out of that whole work headset and work talk to having a much more personal conversation about how that person's life was at Stanford. And I think that also cements the bond that you can have with your interviewer. That brings us to the fourth part of this entire segment, which is what should you really do after your interview is over? You want to send them a short and concise email thanking them for the conversation you had. Preferably do it on the very same day. Sometimes interviewers also ask you, is there something you wanted to mention in the interview which you weren't able to do? Please feel free to shoot a mail to me after the interview is done. You can include that in your post thank you mail. Something that I personally believe in is a combination of two spheres. Number one, you should really try and talk about something that they said in the conversation which you took away and you thought was really interesting and you felt was a unique insight into life at that particular campus. Make sure you mention that in your mail. And the second thing you should mention is really this kind of summary of what you tried to say in your interview. One capstone that really tries to encapsulate your entire conversation so that when they look back at your interview and maybe when they're writing their one-page document, they don't really know what to write, or maybe they're forgetting the entire theme of your interview. That email serves as a quick reminder for what it was you both spoke about. So I'm going to be attaching my Stanford post-interview mail here. You'll notice that it doesn't have me talking about what I liked about what my interviewer said, but I do try to capture what I took away from that interview and what I wanted to communicate. So make sure you also talk about what the other person said, because you want to make sure that you are listening to the person you're talking to and you're an active and engaged person in the interview on the receiving end. You don't want to make it look like, oh, you're just there to talk about yourself and trying to get into this particular university. It's a conversation, and a conversation involves two people. So in your email, unlike what I've done over here, try to mention what they said as well. So those are all of the tips I have about the college interview. I hope that this entire video helped you out a lot. Best of luck for your college admissions interviews. Don't overthink it, don't over-prepare, and remember, you just want them to like you. This isn't something that's going to make or break anything. You got this. Best of luck. I'll see you in the next video.